So, ich möchte Sie ganz herzlich begrüßen zu dieser Eröffnungsdiskussion zur Eröffnung des Vitra Schaudepots. Da wir heute sehr viele Gäste aus anderen Ländern haben, haben wir beschlossen, die Diskussion auf Englisch durchzuführen. Ich hoffe, Sie haben dafür Verständnis. Das ist einfach gegenüber den vielen internationalen Gästen besser verständlich. Und deshalb werde ich jetzt die Sprache wechseln auf Englisch. Welcome all our guests to this opening talk on the occasion of the Vitra Schaudepot. I would also like to welcome further guests which are not here in the Zaha Hadid fire station, but in another building on the Vitra campus, where we have another 400 to 500 guests. So we're really happy that there was such a big interest in this opening talk. Welcome to you all. My name is Matteo Kries. I'm one of the two directors of the Vitra Design Museum, and I would like to introduce our guests on the panel to you, even though I probably don't have to introduce them because you know them. There are the two founding partners of Herzog and Meuron architects, Pierre de Meuron and Jacques Herzog. Very warm welcome. Happy to have you here. Then I would like to welcome Rolf Fehlbaum, Chairman Emeritus of Vitra and founder of the Vitra Design Museum. With these prestigious guests, we would like to discuss tonight some aspects of the Vitra Schaudepot which we are opening tonight. We are going to discuss, of course, about the building itself, about the collection of furniture design that we are displaying in it. We are surely also discussing about collecting design and displaying design in general. The building on the campus will be an issue, and surely also the role of opening the campus towards Basel and what that means for the agglomeration of Basel in general, where the campus is one factor of. But before we start our conversation, I would just like to give a short summary of what you will be seeing later on when we open the Schaudepot. As you all know, the Vitra Design Museum so far was basically one building by Frank Gehry, which has been opened in 1989. Initiated by and commissioned also by Rolf Fehlbaum. And in that building we are showing temporary exhibitions about design from the most different perspectives. We do thematic exhibitions, historical exhibitions. We often do exhibitions on the edge between design and architecture, design and the arts, industrial, social phenomena. So we try to look at design from a very wide perspective. And this has proven to be a very good way to use that wonderful Gehry building because it helped us to establish our museum on an international scale. We do traveling exhibitions. Every exhibition that we show here goes to other museums in the world. We do publications. But that also meant that there is still no place to show our collection. And that got more and more a problem in the last 20 years because the collection grew significantly. In the beginning, when Rolf Fehlbaum initiated the museum, it was some 100 objects. Today, we have around 7,000 pieces of furniture design, around 1,300 lamps. In total, we have around 20,000 objects, around 100,000 items of archival material. And of course, that collection is a responsibility to preserve that collection. It's a treasure that we wanted to share with the audience. And we were always dreaming of having a place parallel to the Gehry building where to show that collection. So finally, when Rolf Fehlbaum, I think it was around 2010, came up with the idea of creating a space for that collection, we were really delighted that this process would finally start. And that was the starting point of what then became the Schaudepot that we are opening tonight. So for us at the Vitra Design Museum, but also at the campus, this is a very decisive moment, and we're going to hear more about this during this conversation. To continue what I've said, I would ask the first question to Rolf Fehlbaum and go back to the beginning of the collection and the museum. Rolf Fehlbaum, when actually did you start collecting design, and how did the Vitra Design Museum then emerge out of that?
Before I give an answer to that, I would like to draw your attention to this building. Just a moment. you may know that is Zaha Hadid's first building, and it has never been as beautiful as now, because now it is, as it was on Zaha's drawings, freestanding. Before there were fences around, there was another building, and it's a completely new view on the building. So I would invite you to afterwards walk around and look at the building again. It is a new perspective, and I wish Zaha could have seen it. Now to the collection. Actually, I never thought to create a collection. Around 80 or 81, I started to buy chairs that I liked. I saw them in shops, during my travels, and I put them in my office, and around my office, I was mainly chairs by Alto or early Eames and Prouvé. These were my three, my heroes, Charles and Ray Eames being now one. And over time, my office looked like a flea market. It was just full of these chairs, and people came and said, well, what's going on here? And I was embarrassed. So I started to think, where could we put these objects? And at that time, now we're about 83 or 84, I got acquainted with Frank Gehry, and he was very interested in chairs, and so we discussed a lot. And one day I asked him, what about doing a little shed for our chairs? Because a museum, the word would have been much, much too pompous for me. So a little shed. And Frank said, that's not easy, because, you know, the travel, this is too expensive also to do that. But when we did the next factory, or we needed a factory, we commissioned Frank Gehry to do the factory, and we put a little extra in front of the factory, and that became then the Vitra Design Museum. And in the beginning, the idea was, yes, we just use it actually as a Schaudepot. And then I met the Alexander von Fegesack, who became the director of the museum, a very dynamic man. And then he did what you mentioned, the temporary exhibits that traveled. And the chairs were out from time to time, or just for a show, but they never could be seen together. And that started to become a problem. Also, many people wanted to see it. And of course, you can say, why would one want to see a chair? What's so special about a chair? And in a way, of course, a chair is something extremely simple. I mean, it just, as you can see, it's just a platform and another platform, and you keep you in space for a position that we couldn't take without a chair. But a chair is much more than that, and it's more than a crutch. In a way, it's a crutch when you look at it. And I think the interest in chairs, not only by us as specialists, but by the public, is that they represent many things. They are seats of authority, they have arms, they have legs, they have feet like us, they're sort of alter ego, they're very close to us, they're little sculpture. They give the rank, that who sits has another, I'm sorry, but has another position than who has to stand. And so there's the chairman, and it had many, many meanings. And that's why I think the chair is fascinating. And I think it became especially fascinating in the 19th and 20th century when architects made chairs or furniture. Because before, architects used artisans to do chairs. They didn't design chairs. But now, they didn't find the chairs, or they used some tonneau chairs, but they needed new chairs. So the Mackintosh, the Laws, the Corbusier, Alto, and all these people, in order to furnish their buildings, they designed chairs. But they did something radically new. And in that new manifestation, they put as much effort as they did in the buildings. There's an enormous energy in these objects. And in many ways, the chairs became also even the messenger. Think of how many people know the Barcelona chair and how few people saw the Barcelona pavilion. So the chairs are much more present than the architects themselves, but I think they represent the essence. And I think that's why so many people also wanted to see the chairs. And then we had the luck to work with Jacques and Pierre to realize that.
I know you are friends. You built another building on the campus before, so I'm sure you knew about Rolf's collection long before the discussion about the Schaudepot started. Could you tell us, how did your conversation about that building start with Rolf Fehlbaum?
Yeah, I can easily take over. Thank you, Rolf. Yes, we have this collaboration and we have this friendship, and we are very lucky, and we are so thankful that we have this opportunity to develop a project and a second project with a very sophisticated client and a vis-a-vis, which is really a vis-a-vis. So that is not just having a thing to do somewhere and fulfilling a program, but it's also developing in content what it is about. And this is not only about architecture, it's not only about, if I may call it, museography, but it is also about urban conditions. And we certainly will also speak about this. You already mentioned that. So how did it start? Rolf came to us and he has an idea, and I remember him well. So he wanted somehow no architecture, no signature architecture, a non-iconic building. He came even one day with a prefabricated program, so that no-name architecture. There was the idea also to make it underground, so non-visible. Only the entrance would be a topic. There was also the idea, if underground, to bring it between the Frank Gehry Museum and the Vitra shop, so like to make a connection, an underground connection with this Schaudepot. Of course, that would have been a very big effort, also money-wise. Also, the money certainly was also an issue to make a simple building, to make with little money to have the best effect. So we discovered, Jacques and myself, of course we knew about the collection, but we didn't know it that well. So it was a real discovery when we went down underground, so non-visible, into the storage. And we were very fascinated by discovering all of that, also how it was stored. We called it a little bit like Brockenhaus style. So it was really not intended to be shown. There was no intention to say, look, this is a beautiful, fantastic, rich collection, and we make it accessible to the people. And that was a very impressive moment to see that, and we had this long, long time in mind, somehow to reflect this atmosphere of this underground condition storage. And they was in front of this hall. This hall, there was an old structure, which I think it was a steel depot, and we were also very impressed by that. And we wanted somehow to reuse industrial site, to an industrial building, also knowing that often industrial buildings are very much appropriate to show whether art or some other objects. But it came out that the structure was weak, so it would have not been feasible to keep the structure. So soon came the idea, and I don't know, you have to tell that, Rolf, but we went on with a visible building, above floor. And what kind of building is that? So we were looking for a very simple form, like a house, similar idea as we had for the Vitra shop, where we said we want this domestic look also for bring to show the furniture, which will be also then in domestic environments later. And so we came up and wanted always to have a very, very simple, almost archaic building, which are 4 walls, a tilted roof, and 1 door.
I remember in that process, there were, as you said, that it was an evolution, that one breakthrough in the real sense of the word was when you came up with a proposal to make a visual connection of the existing depots in the underground and the ground floor, which is the public area. Could you maybe explain that idea, why that was so essential, and why did you not like to keep the initial idea of just having one space? Why did you insist on working on that design until that idea was found?
Before you answer, I would like to say something. It's very typical for Herzog de Meuron. You start a project, and there is a very good proposal, and then they come and say, let's rethink it. Normally, the architect is very happy, the client is happy, so let's go. And in their case, they insisted, it's not right yet. And several ideas came, Jacques. Remember when you wanted to open the floor?
Well, that's the good thing is that we try to improve. The bad thing is that we would like to improve even once it's built. And when I go back, we're always a bit depressed to see all the mistakes. And if you see the mistakes in other people's building, then sometimes that makes you happy because you think they are not so good. But if you see it in our own buildings, it's worse. And no, we can. I think that's the only advantage of getting older, that you have a certain, let's say, palmarès of buildings, of acknowledgement, so you can be more relaxed. But it doesn't, say that you lose your criticism and your critical eye. And in fact, architecture is a difficult business because you go in it, it's three-dimensional, you can walk around, it's really complicated and complex. And of course, during the process, we try to carve out all the possible potentials in a project. And the potentials are the site, the budget, but also the client. And you know that we are friends, not because we like each other's absence of hair, or but because we like each other's intellectual curiosity, and that's a potential of a project, to go as far as you can into a project. And this project here is in many ways something we try to explore. One is, of course, to connect the basilica space that you will see, to carve in, to literally make a hole, and to discover the underground space and connect it and make it more complex. That's easy, but I think it's nice. But the more interesting thing is that this project and all that you started innocently, this is a industrial site, then you make it a cultural site, in that you had this brilliant idea of bringing in Frank Gehry, and Zaha could do her first building, and others came in. And so now in the north of Basel we have Beil and we have Vitra, two world-class sites. In the south we have the Schaulag, which is perhaps the best at all, and the original. And then we have in the center these world-class museums. So I know no other city in Europe besides London and Paris which can be compared to that. No other city. And that makes it a metropolitan city with these hubs. And that's Pierre's and my deep interest, and it's also yours. And this kind of discussion is at the basis of such projects. That's beyond our generation, beyond our lifetime, something which is really great for other generations. This is going to be a kid's ground, this is a family ground, this is a neighborhood. This is going to be really an inspiring place for so many people. And your collection is one ingredient, our architecture, the way you organize everything around it, the art that you bring in. I think that together is the real success of that. And this little house on the side, which makes this building look better, which makes this southern access more interesting, that's all together, I think, what is really interesting about architecture, and not so much one single detail. But the single detail is also important, of course. But I think that's, as a message to non-architects, that's the real, let's say, potential that architecture and urbanism have, and that's why we believe also in the future architecture should be an important factor in how you make a city, how you produce urbanity.
Some days ago you were asked, Jacques Herzog, why didn't you do that building more transparent? Why did you do it so closed? And as a museum person, I would have answered, well, a depot, you don't need light, you have to climatize it. So
that is a journalist question. That is ein gefundenes Fressen. To say,
tell us what you answered to that.
No, I think it's. I think that I said you overestimate transparency as something that everybody believes. Transparency is a very positive word, but why actually? You know. Of course, we could go deep into this whole thing because it stands for democracy and openness, and you know, morally, it's more, let's say, valuable than something which is non-transparent. The FIFA is non-transparent, for instance. but you know, but this building, we did the non-transparent building, so it's more acting on the level of curiosity of attracting people. You know, and once you're inside, like a Wunderkammer, that's more the world that you want to give to people. And it would be stupid, also for curatorial reasons, to expose objects to the sunlight, to the daylight, to all these things. That's on another level, on a technical level.
I think also it's different, let's say like Vitra shop. We are not like in Jacques spoke about urbanity. That's all those dimensions make this site more and more urban, more and more something where people go and have different activities. But it is not the activity in the Schaudepot is not the activity of, for instance, shopping. You know, if you would say, I want to sell something, I want to sell my furniture to the people who stroll around, or clothes or shoes or whatever, this is not the condition to say, here I'm transparent, I look into it and I see what is being done in there. It's the contrary, it's to be within this campus with the different buildings, to have this conditioning. You are conditioned to be here and you know you will somehow discover the Schaudepot. And this discovery is to be attracted by the building, to be attracted also by the landscaping around, but all the things that are around, all those ingredients. And then you have the small door. You go like through a mouse hole. You go into this other environment where then you have the better conditions, I think, to perceive and to be together with the collection and with the objects of the collections.
You mentioned the word Wunderkammer. This was something that we very often had as one reference when we were thinking about the interior, but still it was a very difficult process we went through when we looked for the right solution to put the racks with the objects on. And I remember, Rolf Fehlbaum, one very late evening we sat together and we really didn't have the right solution. You said, Schau ist einfach, Depot ist einfach, aber Schaudepot ist schwierig. So we had to look for that hybrid. Could you explain how that worked?
I think in the end, when you see it, you will all say, well, that's the way to do it. And it's so obvious, and it seems trivial even. But to get there was quite a challenge, and we went through more. One was how to, is the interior part of the architecture, or is it completely separate? And I think in the end we very clearly saw it's a separate thing. It's an installation. It's not part of the architecture. The architecture is, of course, there, but we will not go to the walls. We do something inside. And how much Schau? And in the end, we decided we do a very simple storage system, almost industrial. It's not the same that we have in the real storage, but with in the same spirit. Show chairs on top of each other, which first of all, we wondered, does it work? What do you see? But in the end, actually, we found out that the most direct way is the best way. And I think that is also a guidance that we got from Jacques and Pierre. We discussed many things about it, and you always pointed, let's be as direct and simple as possible. And I think that's what it was. You see, it's the center, what you call the mouse hole, the entrance. You have a central axis. To the right and the left, you have the racks. They're 3 stories high. The last one 4 stories high. That's it. And then the collection in chronological order. There are about 400. How many pieces do we have in there? 420. 430 pieces. They're all visible. in front is a shop, a little shop. Next is a cafe, so called Depot Daily. So people can also stay. And of course, this leads to a completely new use of the campus, because before, I mean, this is an industrial site, and we never want to forget that. This is a factory, here things are produced, and here work is done. And then, I think with the work of the museum, the sort of work that is done is becoming studied and researched, because it's also on furniture. It's not on our furniture, it is on all periods and important contributions to furniture. But now these things come together, the industrial and, let's call it, the cultural. And in the past, the public area was very small. It was just in the front, in the northern part of the building, of the campus. We had there the Vitra Design Museum, and then we had the building by Jacques and Pierre, where the Vitra house, where we show our collections. This was, by the way, an enormous success, that building. We went from about 100,000 visitors that we had in the museum to 350,000 visitors with the new building. So it became a really popular place. But still, it was a place concentrated on the north. The fire station was never public. It was behind the fence, and you could only see it when you took one of these architectural tours. Now, with the Schaudepot, we also liberated the fire station. Now it's becoming public. The fence to the factory or the factory area is in the north, slightly further down. So this becomes an open area. And most importantly, it opens to the city, to Weil, but it opens also to Basel, because now with the tram, you know, you can come with the tram here, I think every 7 minutes or 8 minutes is a tram. You reach Basel now, and because it's nearer to the tram station, it's a much closer walk. You walk 10 minutes and you're here. So it's a completely new situation also in direction to the city and to Basel. And plus it was worked on now together with Günther Vogt, landscape architects. This was a sad part of the and a very unattractive part. And now it's a magical part. It has a square, it has a pergola, it has a garden, and it completely changes the site. So we see again how you can, even on a site like that, how much you can do with the work of the architects and the landscape architects. And I think now it's a completely enchanted area, which was not at all. So also thanks to, I hope Günther Vogt is here. There's a very great cooperation, as it was with the team of you. So I have to be very grateful to you that you put so much work into that little project. I mean, that was enormous. And you put some wonderful team together with Andy Vries, I don't know where he is here, and Florian Stoh. It was a fantastic cooperation. And with Günther Vogt and Lars Ruge and Felix Eder. I hope they're all here. Yeah.
You were speaking about this opening of the campus to Basel, and also on the campus, I think things are changing through that second entrance, because we have another cafe, so the public part gets bigger, and your Vitra house was a very important turning point for that process. So I have heard some people speaking about the Vitra campus as a kind of collection of architecture, which I always found very dangerous, because that suggests that the buildings are alone, isolated. And we notice that now what happens between the buildings is getting more and more important. And you were also mentioning that even though the Vitra house is quite iconic, you also thought a lot about non-iconic buildings. And on the other hand, I think it's even more difficult to create the life between buildings than to create one building, probably, because it is one structure. Could you tell us, how would you approach that further process of the development of the campus, that there is an interaction of the different sites?
Well, I think it's good for the campus to have one Herzog building on one end and one on the other hand. That's already not, so people walk back. Okay. No, but I think it's smart to have Theodora work with you on art projects. Theodora Fischer, I think, is very smart to ask Alvaro Siza, friend of ours, a great architect, who did this path that you start to discover, very strange, but very also minimal, but I think very interesting ingredient, and I think is a step-by-step process of transformation. I think landscaping will play an increasingly important role. To open it up to the south is certainly something. So I think this process of making it an urban neighborhood is certainly a very interesting thing that goes beyond his and our lifespan. I would like to, since we sit here, have a word about iconic and non-iconic. We said this is almost an ortholess kind of a building, and it was misunderstood as something that we are less involved. But to do something which looks like who was the architect, when was it built, is so much more difficult than to just do your sort of what comes out of you emotionally. And nothing against that, but that produces this kind of boredom that you cannot see anymore after a few years. And we know that we have a lot of that in the last 10, 20 years in the whole world. The brands, and to make something which is strong, which has a character, but is simple, is very difficult to describe and even more difficult to do, to achieve. And we work on that somehow, even without knowing from the beginning. Because when you start your career, you don't say, I want to be a minimal architect, even if we started this process, this term of minimalism in architecture, because we discovered it in art, long before it became a brand. But we wanted this as a tool to do something in the world of architecture, which we didn't like at the beginning. And we started with simplicity. But simplicity is not reduction, is not taking things away, but adding things without adding more unnecessary stuff. So it's very difficult to explain, but if we look at the house over there, we could take some concrete details and say, this is why, at the end of the day, it is as it is, starting from the outside to the inside or vice versa, you know. If you take it as a naked building, empty, I think it's quite a nice space. And I think somehow you have to test architecture without anything. And then if we add something great inside, and you're very interested in that topic, we have lately been discussing about so-called interiors. You can transform something in this way or that way. I think the grandest examples perhaps are the great cathedrals. They can be naked if they are hardly anymore used for religious purposes, and they are beautiful monuments in stone. But if they are fully used by Catholic religious cults, Catholic, how would you call this? You know, the fit out can be amazing. Even the smell makes a contribution to what that space then is. And when the Protestants came in the 16th century, they destroy everything and add something different. The smell is even different, you know, it's more like linen, or like when you do the hand wash. It's a more sober world. I take this as an example to tell you that how much interior and architecture can work together and drift you away in totally different ways. And in a similar way, this interior that we've done, now when you go, as you said, Rolf, well, it has to be like this. But we saw it in different ways. We have tested other things, many different models, and we didn't like it. You wouldn't have liked it. And I think that would be interesting to speak about, you know, in so-called Führungen, you know, what has been done. So the chairs, the kind of shelving system, the materials, why is it as it is? And I think that would be an interesting discussion also with people, you know. That then has to do even with Vitra House, with how people choose furniture and lamps for their own apartments. Why do they select this or that? And how do they build their own environment? I think more we discuss, more we go into everybody's own kind of world, you know, and I think that's the interesting thing also about architecture, to discuss that, and not just to say, this is my style, this is what you have to take. This kind of interpretation of design and architecture, I always hated that. Somehow I hated always design for that reason, because it fixes you somewhere, you know, but when it frees you, when it's about discovering and discussing, then it's so interesting, I think, for everyone.
We had this discussion about the separation of the disciplines. You know, in the first part of the 20th century, architecture, design, and interiors were very often in one hand. And as you know, some of the greatest interiors, but also some of the great pieces of furniture, or the greatest, were done by architects who did all three. And in the second half of the 20th century, these disciplines separated, and I think it's a terrible loss that the architects are no longer involved in interiors, or that we don't see that profession anymore as a profession that embraces all these disciplines, the design, say, of furniture, the interiors, and of course the building. And that's an initiative that, I mean, we are very interested in bringing back these things together, but that's for another discussion.
I would just, I think what from the beginning, I think, Jacques, is not to say it has to be simple, has to be exuberant or whatever, flashy. This is not at all now to believe now this is now everything which is simple, now that's the new thing. I think key for that, and that's from the beginning, we were like knowing nothing. We just didn't know what we wanted. We were just leaving behind all kind of preferences and a prioris. That's, I think, the key thing. And maybe next time we do something completely different. That's, I think, the message to it, because it could be completely understood, because now we did the Ricola, we did the parish, we did some simpler forms, that now we are like in this now decade and in this so-called style. So the main thing is to be almost naive and knowing nothing about anything. You just go and perceive and try to find out what it is about. There's always first there are questions before you have some preferences and some preconceptions.
You were mentioning the Schaulager before that you built in the south of Basel. You worked on a display of your own archives. So these were three examples of spaces which are between storing, archiving things, and also displaying. What do you think is so interesting about this combination in comparison to a normal museum where you put a work and then you let it speak for itself, or you show it in an exhibition? An archive, well, I'm a museum person, and it's always difficult because I find it extremely interesting, but often one hears, for outsiders, this is a closed world. How do you think does this building make this world accessible, and what do you think is so interesting about that? Because you did your own archives for a public.
I think these three cases are all a bit different, but it's true that Schaulager, that was really Meuron's ingenious idea, is very hip, became very hip, you know, and even the name. But I think what was really great is the simple fact that collections are growing and the size of artworks were growing, and museums cannot be expanded endlessly. We know how difficult it is to expand a given structure. To expand a museum is almost an impossible thing. I think the Basel Museum is quite a successful example. We will open the Tate in 1 week from now, which I think will work pretty well. We will wait what the people will say, but we are pretty convinced that it works since it comes together as an organism. But expanding museums is difficult, first of all. Secondly, it doesn't make sense to make them endlessly big and bigger. London, yes. Paris, yes. But especially London, because it attracts more people than the rest of the cities together. You know, Berlin doesn't attract much more people than Basel, but London attracts 5 times more, double as many as New York. So there you can expand. But if you make a museum bigger and bigger and bigger, it's ridiculous because it has no people. So that was one reason why a Schaulager is like a storage, which is better than leaving art in a crate, in a box, where it cannot be seen, it cannot also be watched how it performs over the years. So it was a pragmatic reason and a functional reason, but also an aesthetic one in some way, that you can always see the works more compressed, but in the real way, how they are displayed, how they are thought to be displayed by the artists. So they are open for researchers or class schools, just as here. Maybe here you have another hybrid. You have, in the long run or the midterm, you can maybe access some of the real storage. And what you see in the Basilica or in the main space is in fact a real display. Of course, you could take one stool or one chair and put it on the floor and say, now this is like in a museum, this is just this chair. But I don't think that the chair deserves so much attention, because a chair in a museum looks stupid, because a chair is a fucking chair. You want to sit on it or what? But if it's there on the shelf and it's many, then it makes sense, because you can see this chair, then you see the other chair, it's decent. If it's much more space, it starts to look ridiculous. So I think this is the perfect way, you know, and in the Schaulag, it's the perfect way for researchers, but if you really want to see the artwork, then you take it out and put it in a museum. So I think the Schaulag was the beginning of something, even if, of course, it has had Petersburg hanging in the past. There were other examples. But in the modern times, or in the contemporary world, that was the beginning of a new way to do hybrids between storage and presentation, and to think about also what Pierre just said about curiosity, not knowing exactly what we want, to rethink how we want to look at objects, whether it's art or design or natural history objects or whatever.
Just one word. We completely forgot to mention the person who really did the interior. And it was Dieter Thiel, I don't know whether here, and he did a great job on that. And I just wanted to make sure that we don't forget that. Sorry, Pierre.
No, but I repeat what you also said, Rolf, and what you wanted, that what you intended with this project is, as you have the fabrication, the production of objects here, of stools, of furniture, and you have within that, you have also the possibility to see what has been done and how it has been done. And so it is a living piece. It's not just dead pieces who are just being collected and now you showcase them, but you want to have this intense or as intense possibilities for as many people as possible to interact with those pieces and to learn something of them. So this living element or this living aspect, I think, is key for this project.
You both were touching an issue which is very much discussed in design and also in art, which is what is more important. Is it the single object that we put on a shelf and we say, you have to look at this object, at the physical reality that one sees, the details, the material, or is it about the social situation that it reflects, the innovation in industry, etc. And we have made this digital catalog that people can use in the Schaudepot. So when you enter, you can open an app, you can type in the number of an object, and then you get a text and background information. But this is an issue which is also a big controversy in design, which is so much about the fetish and the object which you can buy. And on the other hand, we as a museum try to say, there is so much to read from this object about society, about changes in industry, about philosophy, about the future of a certain time, maybe. And I would address a last question to you, Rolf Fehlbaum. I know that you came from a very precise look at design history, at some figures, at Eames, Alto, Prouvé. Today, the collection is huge, and I know sometimes you say, I don't really like all the objects which are in the collection. There's much more than I would personally buy. So what is for you, does this hurt you, or what is for you more important? Is it to celebrate the big masters of design history, or are there also I know you studied sociology, so you must be interested in societal issues behind the object. What is more important for you?
The object. I mean, I always looked at the object, and the greatest objects were for me the ones that I mentioned before, and I'm still fascinated by them and much less interested by things that come from an interesting process. I still look at the object, and my experience looking now back over all these years is that those objects age best which have a strong constructive element, and those age badly that have a moment. They may be interesting now for a show, they may be interesting to illustrate a time or a fashion or a moment, but the greatest objects to me, and if you go through the collection, maybe you come to a similar conclusion, are those who had a strong sense of necessity and construction, and much less a mood or a personification. Too much personal input into a product is not good for the product, I think.
Now we could have some interesting discussion about that. Yes, I mean, this is one very strong position for that reality of the object itself, which you will see is very present and is very much in the center of the display at the Schaudepot. But if you're interested in the narratives behind those objects, you can access them. I think also this idea of looking down into the basement also is somehow helpful to deal with with those two different perspectives on design, because what we chose in the Basilica, I like that term that you have for the main space, is of course a choice that we made, and we thought well about it, but others would have made different choices. So you can also go to the basement of the building, look into the windows and see that there's a sea of chair that goes on, and there are much more objects, and maybe you would have chosen different ones, so this is up to you.
If I may add something to your question to Rolf, I agree that at the end of the day we're fascinated or attracted by the single object. And I also agree that those chairs which are staying, which keep our interest alive more than others, are those which have this very strong structural backbone, literally spoken almost, and that go back to modernity mostly, because that was when they were born. But in that respect, nevertheless, I think to compare them or to see or to reflect those objects as a result from where they come and in which time they were created is very revealing and somehow depressing. As you grow or walk deeper into the Basilica, you come towards the contemporary days, and the decline in quality, in design quality, is tremendous, I think. Of course, you find some good stuff now, but since we are fascinated all by what is new, digital world, I think the way you sort of find the path through the history with your digital app is brilliant. At the same time, the digital production of the chairs that do kind of a pop-up structure is making things possible out of foam. Today, you can almost do everything. You just glue it somehow together. And that produces more works which are closer to our fantasy worlds, to our individual imagination, also in architecture, rather than something which springs out of some kind of structure behind it. Because that was necessary at the beginning, in the 50s, 60s, even before. So something is being held in place, Even Mies, who was also cheating all the time, but he said, you have to do gladly things in architecture more or less correctly, because otherwise it would fall apart. Today, this is not true anymore. You can do anything and it doesn't fall apart. And the same is true with furniture, somehow. And I think that's also interesting for the visitors to look at the objects from, of course, the standpoint, do I like it or don't I like it, but also from how they are bound to the time and to the production conditions. And I think that makes the transformation possible in how the objects look and how architecture looks and how cities look.
Well, I would disagree. I agree, but also I disagree in some way that if the construction, and we feel this as architects when we are really on the fields and on the sites, if the detailing and the construction is not right, so then it falls apart. And you have leaks and it ages very badly. And good construction, so it's not everything is possible, although there are all those digital possibilities. I think in architecture is not yet the case.
I understand. I understand what you mean regarding Eames, Prouvé, etc. Still, I would say I wouldn't read the Schaudepot display as a kind of decline where the closer it gets towards today, the worse it gets. I think there are some highly interesting contemporary evolutions. I would say it's more an up and down of periods where it's about new technologies, and then there's a period with few innovation in technology on construction, and then the formal aspect gets more important. But today, we're in design, we are at the point where designers look a lot at technologies again. They also question what is industry, what is craft. So it's an interesting moment where also the definitions of design are changing. So I wouldn't say it's a decline. I would say it's an interesting moment. And looking at the past in the Schaudepot, at times 1925 when Breuer did the first tubular steel chair, or when the Eameses did the plastic shelves, these were moments of a big technological breakthrough. And I think these moments come again and again in history. And I think we don't know yet whether digital production is such a moment, but I think it's interesting to look at that and consider that maybe we are at such a point, and maybe it comes in 10 or 20 years. But I just wanted to disturb your pretty nostalgic view.
No, that's why we collected. That's why we collected. We collect all these things. But if you talk about the preferences, then
Yes.
one has personal preferences, obviously.
And I'm sure you will have your own preferences, and that's what the Schaudepot is for, is that you can really go through the history and see which periods you think are really relevant. And that's why we made that digital catalog for you that you can open once you are in the space, and you can also access this from outside the Schaudepot on our website. So it's also the starting point for the online presence of our museum's online collection. I think we looked at the Schaudepot from many interesting different perspectives, from an urbanistic point of view, from an iconic or non-iconic point of view, the collection. I think we made you curious enough now to see the space. So I thank our three guests for that wonderful discussion. We are now going on the plaza in front of the building. There will be some drinks, there will be some short speeches, and then you are all invited to discover that new building. Thanks a lot for coming, and enjoy the evening.